Okay, sir. So in line with resolving this conflict, because it's an obvious conflict, in line with resolving this conflict and fostering towards peace, building peace, what would you say should be like a more lasting solution to this crisis?
Not to. I don't think I have the capacity to give a long-lasting solution, but I could proffer suggestions. Now, the first thing is, if we want to see an end to this sort of conflict, we need to look at our security architecture. Yes, since last year, we started hearing about calls for policing at the community level. They said, okay, if government can no longer sustain or can no longer expand our existing policing structures to be able to cater for all the numerous ungoverned spaces that we have, why don't we take it to the communities, community policing? Let communities know that there is a role they can play in ensuring that they are safe. And for us as an organization, is one of the things that we do. We try to foster that relationship between communities and security agencies to let them understand that, okay, this is what you should do when you live in a community, when there are strangers, there are people you don't know hovering around. You need to find out what is it exactly that they are doing, what are they up to, and then report to the relevant authorities and say, okay, beforehand, they have gotten the information. Okay, we have certain people here, we don't understand what they're doing. Can you help us come check them out? So even if it takes them a day or two to come, at least that will help to solve part of the problem, rather than waiting for communities to be attacked or for a dispute to grow into a violent confrontation before we start sending troops to quell. That's one. On the other part, there are alternative dispute resolution mechanisms. Now, at community level, when something happens, people report to the religious leaders. They want to look at the community leaders. They want to look at the traditional rulers and all that. Can we, as a country, begin to build the capacities of these people for alternative dispute resolution mechanisms? Let them know how to facilitate negotiations, let them know how to facilitate mediations, so that at that level, because the absence of this capacity is one of the reasons why when you have these issues, you even have people who you are expecting to be in positions of authority that should contribute to being the solution, making certain comments that rather escalate whatever it is that is happening at the community level. So as a country, can we begin to intentionally build the capacities of our duty bearers at community levels so that they understand that when you have a dispute, because believe you me, whether you like it or not, every conflict usually starts with two individuals. So at that level, can we begin to learn how to handle that? That is one. Now, secondly, thirdly, I'll also say that when we've put all this together and we have conflicts still emerging, can we have leaders who are responsible enough to understand that when something of this nature happens, you need to first calm everyone down. Let's calm down and sit down at the table and look at the causes. What is responsible for this? There are grievances. What are they? So community members or whatever the parties, whoever they are able to express their grievances. So this leads to what we're talking about, transitional justice processes. So if there's a conflict, rather than flogging everybody to run away, then can we have structures that will address this, will step in and say, okay, come, this issue is between the two of you. So can we hear from both sides? What is responsible? What do you think? And as development organizations, what we believe in community-driven solutions. So it is not from the top that you come and slap everyone and say, you do this, you do. No. What is it that you think we should do to make sure that this thing doesn't happen anymore? And then, again, we also need to look at it holistically rather than looking at it as a Southern Kaduna issue? Can we begin to look at the nexus between other things and the conflicts that we experience? Like I gave you an example earlier, climate change, for instance. If we look at it critically, we will see that the patterns of migration, of movements across the country in terms of farmers and herders relationships now, for instance. Now, the patterns of movements have changed over the years because climate change has led to things like the reduction in the amount of rainfall that is experienced. You have desert encroachment, especially in further north.
Yes.
And these things have increased the competition for resources which we agreed earlier that are always scarce. So how do we look at the nexus between this and that? So if you address some of these issues, will it perhaps solve some of the problems we're having? Another thing that we should look at the nexus between and the conflict is the issue of unemployment. Governance has been so far and yet so near. So we have this huge pool of people who are supposed to be engaged in something, but they're not doing anything. If you travel around communities, I spend 70% of my time in rural communities, and I thought there are tons of young people. But the people who run this country, rather than looking for ways to gainfully employ these people or create opportunities or create an enabling environment, because
Yes.
of course government cannot provide employment for everyone. So creating an environment that will enable us to grow businesses and all that.
Yeah.
They don't do so. So you now see them engaging these young people in all forms of violent and criminal activities. So you give weapons to people, and then you see the pattern. At the end of every election year, the following year, there's an upsurge in cases of kidnapping, armed robbery, and all that. If you don't need common sense will tell you that there is something that happens during that process that leads to that. So apart from those quick fixes that we are looking at, can we begin to look at the nexus between some of the other experiences within our context and how they are invariably feeding into some of these crises that we have at various levels?
Thank you very much, Mr. Cliff Guy.